Hi YouTube, welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we are going to be talking about ancient Egypt and alchemy. So hopefully this is a topic that you're interested in. If it is, then stick around. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first of all, I'm going to show you guys my statues. I have Isis. And I have Osiris, her husband. So this was like the ancient power couple. You should know that when we talk about Egyptian god names, they actually have more than one name. So they have a common, not Egyptian name, which would be Greek in origin. And then when we talk about the proper name for an Egyptian goddess, Isis would be Iset or Aset. And then for Osiris, his proper name would be Lusir or Usir. And then for Horus, for example, it would be Heru. And for Seth or Set, it would be Satesh. And then for Thoth, or also known as Hermes, it would be Tahuti. So if somebody is talking to you about Tahuti, now you know that they're talking about Thoth or Hermes. Thoth or Hermes, if you guys don't know, is a very important deity because that is the one that taught us everything that we know about alchemy and about manifesting, for example. Keep in mind that hieroglyphic writing, it lacks vowels. So there are three main phases of Egyptian history. There's the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. And each has their own literature, their great text. First of all, there's the pre-dynastic period, which goes from about 10,000 or so to 3050 BC. And there was no dynasty at that time. And then we have the early dynastic period, which would be the first and the second dynasty. And then we have the Old Kingdom. And then we had the first intermediate period. And then we had the Middle Kingdom. And the Middle Kingdom had the coffin text, and that went from about 2034 BC. And then we had the New Kingdom, and the New Kingdom went from about 1549 BC. The third intermediate period, the late period, which had the Iron Age, which was about 500 BC. And then we had the Ptolemaic period, and then we go into the Roman period where we had the Roman Empire. And then after that we had the Byzantine period with the Byzantine emperors. And during the three periods, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom, we had three really important texts. We had the pyramid text, the coffin text, and the books of the dead. So you guys may want to read that to really know your ancient Egyptian history. Other recommended things to read would be the Kabbalion, the Emerald Tablets, and there's also a book called Hermetic Magic, which you can read. There were four major mystery schools where a lot of this knowledge came from, and you had to be an initiate to get the knowledge in these sacred mystery schools. And so the first one was Hermopolis, and that one corresponded with the element of water. And the god Thoth. And then we had Memphis, which corresponded with the element of earth, and the god Ptah. And then Heliopolis, which corresponded with fire, and Ra. And then we had Thebes, which corresponded with air, and Amun. So those were the 4 mystery schools. People would go and they would get their knowledge. So a lot of the esoteric philosophy, a lot of the ancient knowledge that we talk about come from those 4 mystery schools. So when we talk about timing, the Egyptians had 3 different seasons.
So the 3 seasons, we had inundation, which is the black phase, which corresponds to Mercury, and then we had emergence, which is the white phase, which corresponds to salt, and then we had the harvest, which is the red phase and corresponds to sulfur.
I think Houston has 3 seasons as well. And so the Egyptian style of manifesting works really well in Houston because of the 3 seasons.
When we look at the symbolism here in alchemy, we see Mercury, salt, and sulfur. Mercury corresponds to the spirit, salt corresponds to the body, and sulfur corresponds to the soul.
When we talk about the spirit, we are actually referring to the mind. When we talk about the body, that's pretty self-explanatory. And then when we talk about the soul, what we're talking about is consciousness. Akhet, that was the time to manifest. And it also corresponded with black, which was death and stillness. Pert, it was about to animate. And we also had the color white, which was the blooming of life. And then during Shmu, we had transform, and we had the color red, which represented transformation. So manifest, animate, and transform. And it makes sense because if you think about the spirit or the mind is your tool that you use to manifest. And then your body, it's animated, and that's your tool that you use. It's animated so you do things, right, to get your manifestations. And then with the soul or the consciousness, because we have that, we're able to transform. So maybe even working with our consciousness and our soul and working with like the universal soul and the universal consciousness, which would help us to know the direction that we are supposed to go in, for example.
Air is east, water is south, earth is west, and fire is north.
And there were 12 hours of the sun's journey through the sky, and there were 3 different types of rituals. So the sun's starting to get warm in the sky. And this would go from the 1st to the 4th hours, which would be about 7:20 to about 10:20 a.m. And then we had noon, and we had Ra, which you guys probably know Ra is the god of the sun, so that makes sense. And then we had boiling, and it was the 5th to the 8th hours, which would go from about 11:20 to 2:20. And then we have the sunset, or Atam. Simmering, which went from the 9th to the 12th hours, so about 3:20 p.m. to 6:20. And then also I would like for you guys to note that Mercury represented acts of creation, salt represented acts of maintaining, and sulfur represented acts of conclusion. Like, let's say that I created a Corvette. I also have to be able to maintain what I created, right? I have to work and pay the bills or whatever. So I think a lot of their system makes sense to me. And then the acts of conclusion, which is also like the acts of transformation. I think that's really interesting, and that's where we talk about the soul. That's what they would do during the day as far as their rituals. So if you wanted to use that acts of creation, let's say that you wanted to have a really refreshing morning bath with some sea salt, and it was to renew yourself and like renew your spirit, you might do that during the acts of creation or during the sunrise, because your whole concept is that you're going to be creating like a new self. There were some things during night times that I won't go into because I'm not going to teach you guys how to do bad things. But during the twilight, they would say that that represented the dead, and that's the time when you could talk to your ancestors. And then they said that the pre-dawn was for regeneration, and that was the best time to try to help sick people. If you're going to do it through a ritual. That's all that I have on this today, and I will come back later and give you guys more on this topic. I have a ton of books on this subject, and so I can compile, for example, like 3 different books or my own notes that I take off of different sites and things like that. But you guys don't have to believe me. You can do your own research and you can form your own opinions. This is just something for you to think about and to give you some knowledge and some information. Sometimes people like to visualize. What these deities actually represent is an aspect within your own mind, because everything is essentially in the mind. And the concept is that instead of begging them to do something, you would work with them or even command them. And then eventually you would realize that you have become a goddess and that you can do everything by yourself, basically. You may have a period in your life where you want to take on certain characteristics of Isis, and then you may want to just not even work with them anymore after a while and just work with your mind only. So it's just an option. I know it seems a little bit weird, but you're basically talking to an aspect of yourself. Like Beyonce has an alter ego called Sasha Fierce. You know, embody that and act as if. It can actually be really good for you because you get to decide who you want to be and you get to be that. It's like law of attraction. You get to decide who you want to be, what you want to have, and what you want to do. It's all up to you. Obviously, you kind of have to start from where you're at, but you know, that's just the human limitation. Your only limitation is basically yourself and the limitations that you've already put on yourself in the past. The Books of the Dead, I know that I've listened to that on YouTube before, and I've listened to it when I was trying to fall asleep because it goes on and on. But what I really picked up from it is just that they talk a lot about I am triumphant, I am triumphant, I win, I'm triumphant. And that's kind of how we should be talking to ourselves. I hope that this was helpful to you guys. I will go ahead and conclude this, and then we will go into more depth later on. Like this video so more people will be able to see it, and subscribe if you would like to see more videos. Thank you so much. Bye.